In the midst of a noisy and bustling life, have you ever longed for a peaceful space close to nature? Today's story will take you on the journey of a person who bravely left the city, choosing a simple but meaningful life in a peaceful suburb where sincere values, understanding, and harmony are put first. Join me in this simple but also surprising and meaningful story. Don't forget to like, share, or click follow to not miss other interesting stories. I have moved to this peaceful suburb for more than 10 years. The decision to leave the hustle and bustle of the big city was not easy, but deep in my mind I always longed for a simple life, close to nature. Finding this place is like a surprise gift that fate has given me. A land hidden behind rows of lush green trees, just over 30 minutes drive from the city center, but seems to belong to a completely different world. My small house is located at the end of a white gravel road, flanked by rows of tall old pine trees, providing cool shade all year round. In the early morning, when the dew has not yet completely cleared, each ray of sunlight penetrates the canopy, creating shimmering, magical streaks of light. What I like most is standing on the porch, watching the surrounding scenery in a state of absolute stillness, clearly hearing the gentle beats of nature, breathing in the fresh air with the scent of newly cut grass. My farm is not big, but I take care of it meticulously and carefully, enough to provide a source of clean food every day. The green vegetable beds spread out behind the house are the result of meticulous care every day. I love the feeling when my hands are dirty with mud, feeling life sprouting from each small seed. The red tomato plants, the lettuce and kale beds are always lush and green. Every morning, after watering the vegetables, I often walk around the garden, gently checking each leaf, happily observing the smallest signs of growth. A little further away, I built a chicken coop with sturdy and clean wooden boards, lined inside with a thick layer of dry and fragrant straw. The chickens were not many, but very friendly. They seemed to understand the peace I created for them, so they always leisurely walked around the garden, looking for food, occasionally making pleasant clucking sounds. Every late afternoon, when the sun began to set low, I would take a small basket to the chicken coop, picking up each warm egg nestled in the soft straw. Those eggs, though simple, brought indescribable joy and pride every time I brought them into the kitchen. My farm also has a special little corner dedicated to honeybees. Beekeeping started out as an experimental hobby, but the more I did it, the more I enjoyed and loved them. The hive is discreetly placed under the canopy of an old apple tree, where the bees diligently fly back and forth every day to collect nectar from the surrounding wildflowers. I love their gentle buzzing, and every time I see the golden honey flowing from the hive, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude for nature. The peaceful life here just flows by quietly. Every day and every hour is filled with small, simple joys that I have never felt when living in the heart of the crowded city before. I gradually realized that moving to this suburb is not simply a choice of place to live, but also a choice of a way of life. The way of life I choose is to immerse myself in the slow rhythm, enjoy every peaceful moment, and always be grateful for the small land that has nurtured me over the years. There is nothing more wonderful than waking up every day in the midst of gentle nature, enjoying this simple but priceless happiness. After many years of enjoying the simple joys of a small farm, I suddenly realized that the abandoned land behind my house seemed to reproach me every time I passed by, not because of money or income, but because of the feeling of regret when looking at the land covered with wild grass, wasting the priceless gift that nature had given me. I decided to do something, like planting a few more rows of fruit trees, so that every inch of land here could live up to its inherent value. The idea of expanding the farm grew slowly, silently, like a smoldering fire inside me. I began to plan carefully down to the smallest detail, carefully selecting each variety of tree, meticulously measuring the land to be expanded, and even carefully preparing the materials to build a new fence. But just as I was about to hammer down the first stake marking the new territory, a small mysterious piece of paper flew in and stuck to the old fence. I picked it up, surprised to read the short, hastily written words, "Stop before it's too late." Suddenly, I felt that someone was silently watching my every move. But after a few weeks of careful consideration, I finally decided to plant apple and pear trees, my favorite fruit trees since I was a child. I always remember the wonderful feeling of enjoying the sweet, crunchy apples right in my grandparents' garden. I also believed that when these trees grew up, they would provide more shade, better protection for the chicken coop and bee colony, and at the same time, beautify my small plot of land. The first thing I did was to clearly mark the area of the expansion. All afternoon, I slowly used wooden stakes and ropes to measure and define the location of the new fence. Excited and nervous, I believed that this small change would bring many good things, not only for myself, but also for the surrounding community. After marking the area, I started preparing the materials to build the fence. Sturdy wooden planks, carefully selected from the local store, were neatly arranged in the yard, ready to build a beautiful fence in harmony with the general landscape and strong enough to protect the new orchard. I knew that in this community, unity and harmony were always put first. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, quickly finishing up my farm chores before setting about erecting the new fence. I drove each wooden post into the ground, firmly securing it, unaware that this seemingly harmless decision would set off a chain of unexpected problems. As I worked diligently, a familiar figure appeared at the head of the gravel driveway. It took only a glance to recognize it. Karen, the HOA president, the neighborhood control freak, was striding toward me with a calculating gaze. Karen was known for her strictness, perhaps a little too much in maintaining order and the general beauty of the community. I tightened my grip on the wooden post, knowing a battle was about to begin. Although we weren't particularly close, we were still polite to each other when we met by chance. However, this time I could clearly feel a different air from her serious expression and the way she approached where I was working. I quietly watched Karen as she strode decisively down the gravel path, her eyes tense, her lips pressed together, and her brows furrowed in annoyance. Karen stopped abruptly in front of the fence posts I had just erected, her eyes scanning every detail as if searching for errors. I continued to work in silence, but I could clearly feel the sharp judgment in her every glance. Finally, Karen spoke up, breaking the silence of the garden. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear that she was deeply dissatisfied, very upset. She mentioned the construction of my fence, claiming that it had changed the overall landscape of the area that was very well maintained, emphasizing that it had broken the general aesthetic, a familiar phrase she always used at community meetings. I knew very well that Karen had always prided herself on maintaining a uniform standard beauty for the area, but I had never thought that adding a small fence to plant a few fruit trees would become such a big deal. Karen was a serious, middle-aged woman, always dressed neatly and impeccably with long blonde hair. It was often joked that Karen spent more time caring about the neighborhood than she did herself. There was not only displeasure in her eyes, but also a hint of challenge, as if my small fence were a serious crack in the ideal community picture she had worked so hard to maintain. She began to point out every detail she thought was inappropriate, from the height of the fence to the style and color of the slats I had chosen. I listened patiently, but the more I listened, the more confused I became, not expecting such a simple plan to provoke such a strong reaction from Karen. I had no intention of doing anything to harm or negatively impact the community, and I didn't want to conflict with anyone, especially Karen. I had been very careful in my planning, considering every little detail so as not to upset anyone or detract from the beauty of the place. However, I understood that Karen was the type of person who would always be firm in her stance when it came to what she thought was right. She continued to analyze each reason, citing a series of regulations from the Homeowners Association that I had not thought of when I started the expansion plan. In Karen's voice, I sensed determination, seriousness, and a hint of warning, making me clearly aware that she would not let this matter go easily. Karen's angry appearance made me flinch. A flicker of doubt crept into my mind, wondering if expanding the farm was a mistake, but my common sense told me that this small plan did not deserve such a harsh reaction. Karen, her eyes blazing with power and her attitude tolerant of resistance, stood there as if I had committed a serious crime. She pointed at the fence, her voice as sharp as a knife. "You can't change the appearance of this area. Your farm is affecting the standards we strive to maintain." Her words were like a verdict, but I didn't reply. I just watched as Karen turned away, her back disappearing down the gravel path. The air felt strangely stuffy. I stood there between the newly erected fence posts, a sense of unease rising. Was this just a simple protest, or was it the beginning of a storm I hadn't seen coming? That afternoon, after my tense encounter with Karen, I continued to build the fence, but her sharp threats kept coming to mind. Karen was more than just a control freak. She was the nightmare of anyone who dared to break the norms imposed by the HOA. I had heard countless stories of how she crushed those who opposed her, but I never thought I would be her next target. Watching the fence slowly being completed, I tried to reassure myself that there was nothing wrong with expanding my farm. But then, the image of Karen's eyes burning with anger, her cold, authoritative voice, echoed in my mind. "You will regret this." I stopped in my tracks, a shiver of unease running down my spine. This wasn't just a protest. This was a warning. And I knew Karen wasn't the type to make empty threats. The sun was slowly setting, the afternoon light covering the entire farm in a warm orange color, but the familiar peaceful feeling today was not the same as before. I tried to quickly finish the remaining work, hoping that everything would be resolved peacefully soon. But just as I put down the last tools, preparing to pack up and return home, I suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the end of the road. A police car was slowly driving down the small road leading to the farm. The flashing blue and red lights and the sound of the car engine broke the usual silence. At that moment, I felt an indescribable sense of unease. I had no idea what was going on, but deep down, I knew that the appearance of the police car at this moment must be related to the tense conversation with Karen. I tried to stay calm, standing quietly in place, waiting for the next developments, hoping that it was all just a small misunderstanding. From afar, I saw Karen standing near the entrance, her face cold as ice, her hands constantly pointing towards my farm as she talked to the two policemen who had just gotten out of the car. My heart sank. Her harsh warnings from the afternoon echoed in my head like a terrifying prophecy. I never thought Karen would go this far. Calling the police over a fence? This was no longer a debate about community rules. This was a war. She wanted to take me down. I stood motionless in the middle of the garden, watching them approach. Confusion gradually turned to disappointment, and then to a smoldering anger. This farm was my hard work, my pride. Since when did it become a threat in Karen's eyes? Become a hotbed of such unnecessary disputes? And since when were a few wooden posts enough to make her willing to bring the law into the picture? But there was one thing Karen didn't know. I was not the type of person who could be easily subdued, and if she wants a fight, I'm ready to go all the way. I began to feel the invisible pressure weighing down on my shoulders. Each step of the approaching police officers made me feel more and more uneasy and nervous. Despite my absolute confidence in my own transparency and correctness, I still could not help but feel helpless when faced with a situation that I had never thought would happen in this peaceful land. In that tense moment, I realized that sometimes the fierceness and firmness in defending one's personal views, typically Karen, can push seemingly small and easily resolved situations into an unnecessary conflict, causing the relationship between residents in the community to suddenly become tense and suffocating. As the two policemen approached, I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but the atmosphere in the farmhouse had changed completely. The familiar, peaceful feeling was gone, replaced by a heavy tension that crept through every row of plants, every unfinished fence post. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the white gravel path, and their steady footsteps tapped into my mind, reminding me that this was no small matter anymore. Karen had played a big game, and whether I wanted to or not, I was caught in the crossfire. They stopped in front of me. Their faces were calm, but their sharp eyes scanned the farm as if assessing the battlefield before making a decision. They had obviously heard Karen's side of the story before they came here. I could imagine what she had said. The twisted accusations, the carefully crafted arguments designed to make me look like a saboteur. But I saw no hostility in their eyes, only the careful, professional look of people doing their job. I clenched my hands, feeling the rough wood of the fence beneath my fingertips. I knew that the most important thing right now was not anger, but calm, because I had something Karen didn't have. The truth, and I wouldn't let anyone twist it. I knew that the most important thing right now was calm and honesty, because I believed in the rightness and the justice of what I had done. Immediately after that, one of the two police officers began to explain clearly the reason for their presence, his voice calm and steady, which made me feel somewhat relieved. According to the explanation, they received an urgent call from Karen, reporting that I was carrying out illegal construction, violating public space and threatening to affect the general order of the area. While listening to each story, I felt the seriousness and determination of Karen reporting this matter, which made me a little disappointed and worried. I didn't expect that building a simple fence would be considered such a serious trespass. After getting all the initial information from Karen, the policeman turned to me and asked me to explain clearly and specifically what I had done in the past few days. I took a deep breath to calm myself down, then slowly recounted the entire process. From when I intended to expand my small farm, I described in detail how I had carefully prepared, from choosing materials, carefully measuring the area I planned to expand, to making sure that the construction scope was completely within the limits of the land under my legal ownership. While I was explaining, the two policemen listened attentively, occasionally nodding slightly, occasionally exchanging cautious glances. I also took this opportunity to clarify that I had no intention of breaking any rules set by the community, but rather, I was always very attentive to the general aesthetic standards that everyone in the area tried to maintain. I also confirmed that the construction of the new fence and the planting of additional fruit trees were entirely on private land, which I had full legal ownership documents. After hearing my explanation, both police officers continued to ask for more information regarding the land boundaries, the specific area of expansion, and even asked me to provide additional documents for verification. I quickly agreed and was willing to cooperate fully. I clearly understood that only complete transparency was the key to solving this problem in the best way. While waiting for me to get the documents, I noticed that the initial tension on their faces gradually eased, as if they also began to feel the sincerity and honesty in my words and actions. However, things were not yet completely settled, and the suspense still quietly spread within me when I saw Karen still standing in the distance, patiently waiting and observing the whole process with a determined look in her eyes, as if she was sure that the law would be on her side. But I believed that once the police officers understood the story, justice would definitely be on the side of the truth. I quickly went into the house to get the documents that I had prepared since the beginning of the project. At that time, I felt a little nervous, but also full of confidence, because I knew clearly that I had not done anything illegal or against the regulations of the community. These documents were the clearest proof that I had the complete right to use and expand my small farm on the land that was legally owned. When I returned to the file in my hand, I calmly presented the file, starting with the land ownership certificate, which clearly defined the legal boundaries of the farm. I emphasized that the new fence was entirely within my land, not encroaching on public land or anyone else's. The police officers flipped through the file, their sharp eyes comparing the information with the facts. Occasionally, they exchanged brief exchanges, nodded, or made a mark on their notebook. I calmly presented more papers, the local regulations that I had carefully studied before starting work. By law, I had every right to expand the farm on my land as long as it did not seriously affect the surrounding environment or violate building limits. I saw them nod slowly, their faces gradually relaxing, but Karen, standing not far away, still clenched her fists, her eyes flashing with anxiety, the sign of someone who was beginning to realize that she had made a bad bet. I flipped through the file, pointing to the clause that stated, "Residents are encouraged to develop small-scale agriculture on their property, especially in suburban areas, to maintain sustainability and ecological balance." My voice was firm, each word like a hammer blow to Karen's absurd accusations. This was not only my right, but also a supported policy. I saw the officers exchange glances, their doubts gradually fading. But Karen? Her face was pale, her lips pressed together, as if her entire plan had just collapsed before her eyes. As the police officers continued to check and verify each detail in the file, I could clearly feel the initial tension on their faces had completely disappeared, replaced by a sense of peace and trust in what I had presented. It seemed that the evidence I had provided was not only clear and legal, but also very complete, making them gradually understand the problem and have a fairer view. I could not help but feel relieved to see the two police officers' attitudes gradually change, but also worried that such a simple issue had been pushed to such a tense level. Regardless, I still appreciated their professionalism, because only carefulness and objectivity can ensure that justice is properly carried out. After the police officers spent a thorough amount of time reviewing all the documents I provided and comparing them with the facts of the disputed area, they finally came to a clear conclusion about the incident. I stood there, waiting for their final decision. My heart was nervous, but I still kept calm, because I always believed in the correctness of my decision. I believed that the incident would be resolved quickly and fairly. The police officer examined the file carefully, then nodded in confirmation. All my papers were valid. He emphasized that the expansion of the farm was completely within my legal land ownership and in accordance with local regulations. Moreover, the law encouraged green agriculture as long as it did not affect the surrounding environment. Karen stood there dumbfounded, all her arguments now just baseless accusations. As the police were checking the records, one of the officers flipped through a document Karen had submitted to the HOA, then frowned slightly. He took out his phone and called the office to verify. After a few minutes, he turned back, looked at Karen, and said coldly, "Do you know that forging HOA documents is a violation of the law? According to the original records we have, there is no regulation prohibiting him from building a fence, but the one you submitted has a completely new clause." Karen turned pale and stammered in her defense, but the officer just shook his head slightly. "You have the right to remain silent, but if you continue to try to manipulate the system, we may launch a formal investigation." As I listened to the conclusions, I felt a sense of relief, as if a huge burden had been lifted from my mind. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the impartiality and objectivity that the police officers showed in resolving the issue. I realized that, although troubling situations sometimes arise unexpectedly in life, in the end, truth and transparency are always the most important things to overcome any misunderstandings. While I feel much lighter now that the matter has been cleared up, I still can't help but think about Karen's harsh reaction and aggressive attitude. While I understand that she always had good intentions in trying to protect the beauty and harmony of the community, her actions this time went too far beyond what was necessary, causing unnecessary tension and trouble. However, I also understand that everyone has their own perspective, and perhaps Karen was so focused on the principles she always believed in that she ignored other equally important values, such as neighborliness and mutual understanding. After the police officer explained clearly, Karen's face showed disappointment, but she had no reason to continue complaining. The police confirmed that everything I did was legal and dismissed her complaint decisively. Standing in my position, I just silently observed everything that was happening, with no intention of winning or being satisfied with anyone's failure. I simply felt reassured that justice was clearly and transparently shown. I never wanted to create conflict, and I did not want the relationship between neighbors to become distant or tense just because of such a small misunderstanding. Finally, as the police car drove away, dusk fell, casting a familiar, peaceful look over the farm. Standing in the middle of the garden, I watched the car disappear, feeling as if I had just overcome a challenge, leaving behind a sense of relief and serenity. From a distance, I saw Karen standing still, with a look of disappointment and discontent as the police car drove away, seemingly understanding that things had gotten out of hand. Finally, she turned and walked slowly home, leaving the farm in its usual peace. Karen disappeared behind the fence, and I quietly packed up my tools. There was no more anger, only sympathy. I realized that sometimes being too stubborn about what you think is right makes you forget that flexibility and understanding are the keys to maintaining community harmony. A few days later, I was surprised when a few neighbors came to visit with a friendly attitude and wanted to support me in completing the expansion of the farm. They all expressed that my project was really meaningful, contributing to bringing green space and ecological diversity to this suburban area. In the following days, I gradually returned to normal life. The new fence was quickly completed carefully and firmly. The first apple and pear trees were also planted in the ground, bringing with them the belief and hope for a green future that I have always cherished. Every morning I walked around the farm. I loved the land more and more, knowing that every small change done right and responsibly would bring long-term benefits. Although Karen no longer objected, I could still feel her displeasure, but she knew the law was on my side. Gradually the tension subsided, and the conflict did not recur. Every day I tended the farm, watched the young plants grow, the bees gather honey, and the chickens leisurely forage for food. In that peaceful space, I became more certain that my decision to expand the farm was the right one, contributing to enriching the life I had always wanted. And deep in my mind, I knew that I had not only won a petty argument, but also won in upholding the values I had always pursued: harmony, honesty, and respect for the law. The above story is a gentle reminder of the beauty of a simple life, close to nature, and the value of sincerity, fairness, and mutual respect. If you sympathize with this message, please share the story with your loved ones as an encouragement that life is always better when we know how to sympathize, understand, and stand firm for what is right. Don't forget to take the time to leave your thoughts, comments, or contribute your ideas to help the story spread and become more meaningful. Don't forget to like, share, or click follow. Sincerely thank the audience for taking the time to watch. Wishing you always find joy and peace in every moment of life.